So, in some ways, Raymond Colopy has been one of the lesser known of the criminal brothers, but we heard extensive details through an affidavit filed as part of a cab case, maybe given more of a background. Raymond Colopy, of course, is was one of a number of Colopy brothers who were key members of one of the feuding gangs in Limerick.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from our point of view over the years, Ray Collopy would have kind of seen as being kind of the quieter member of the family. But this cab case, which came about after €33,000 found in his girlfriend's house in 2019, paints a very different picture that, you know, he was very much a senior member of the organised crime group. Now it does mention, like, you know, that his brother Brian would have been the oldest. So you've Brian, you've Kieran, you've Philip, who was killed in 2009, Jonathan, Damien, as well as then Raymond as well. Now, I don't think I have them in the correct chronological order there,
far off, I think.
But the affidavit kind of goes through, you know, all of them, and about, you know, and about the roles they've played in their particular family group, but also the role that the group played within that infamous feuding that went on in Limerick all through the early 2000s, and, you know, that cost about 19 lives, and you know, and it goes right back to 1993 when their father Jack Colopy was attacked by a couple of men, beaten up outside his house, and one of those, John Ryan, was subsequently murdered. But that, you know, it mentions that, you know, the sons took it upon themselves to begin a violent feud.
Yeah, I mean, and Jack Colopy, of course, was one of the men that was pictured in this famous photograph where there'd been talks about the feud, and he was seen shaking hands. I think Jimmy Collins was one of them. But, you know, when you see the evidence of this, it really stretches back to that feud with John Ryan, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was that. Like, I mean, there's other stories about, you know, there was children fighting in the playground, and, you know, and wives of girlfriends were attacking each other. But this is kind of one of the earliest kind of instances that we know of.
They had kind of all been roughly sort of a relatively coherent organisation that mixed around with each other and didn't have any particular bad beef, but this really escalated it so quickly.
Yeah, and I suppose the guys were pretty fearsome. I mean, there was a phrase used that, you know, he's widely respected and feared, and this was used with a number of the Colopy brothers by, you know, in the affidavit, you know, as a way of saying that they were kind of pretty dangerous sort of characters, and, you know, and other people in gangland were frightened of them, you know, people involved in selling drugs, which is what it was all about. And I guess really what happened was that as, you know, time wore on, and, you know, as the economy really picked up in the late 90s, so did the drugs trade. And when you're getting in then to the, you know, into the 2000s, like, you know, it's becoming a multi-million international business. And they very much then, they kind of, you know, there was a natural alignment with the Keens, who are also in the island fields, you know, and they're from Munchins and St. Edith Street and St. Mary's, all of this, you know, it's a small little area.
So and geographical alliance.
And there was a kind of a natural alignment there, because, of course, Ryan had fallen out with the Keens as well. And, you know, it mentions in the affidavit, like, one of the Keens and one of the Colopy brothers, who was only a teenager at the time, were the chief suspects in that murder, which would have been, I think, about the third in the kind of the feud, you know, as it was kind of starting to ramp up. It would have come, I think, just 8 or 9 months after Kieran Keane was murdered, and this famous kind of a double cross that happened, and, you know, and there was the kind of, you know, when people kind of showed their colours as to, you know, what side of the divide they were going to be on, but I suppose the point we're making is that, you know, Raymond might have been seen as quiet, but he was part of this serious and dangerous and, you know, drugs gang that was making a lot of money and doing what they needed to do to protect that from, you know, the would-be newcomers such as the Dundon brothers. So you know, even about, I think it was in 2004, like, they made a serious attempt on Wayne Dundon's life, and this is part of it. You know, the stuff that we might have heard of before, but this is kind of in black and white in evidence. And Wayne Dundon was sitting in a car near the Crescent Shopping Centre outside of McDonald's, and a number of shots were fired at him. And the guards were able to react relatively quickly. There was a motorbike, was seen going in one direction, and then two of the Colopy brothers and two of their cousins were arrested, coming from this car where they believed that the pillion passenger who fired the shots had got into this car. Now, there's never any charges from that. But again, this was all part of building up the picture of the criminality of the Colopy brothers, and it was part of the whole belief evidence over this 33 grand.
So that's all effectively 20 years ago, and obviously that criminal organisation, the Colopys, and it was of course called the Keane Colopys for a while, that continued over the next 20 years, and simultaneously to that criminal activity, according to the guards occurring, we also hear that in the cab affidavit how Raymond Colopy was also had another source of income, if you want, which would have been social welfare.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, these are kind of the way they go through someone's finances, and they kind of show their legitimate income to prove that, there's no way that this guy, had this 33 grand, which he said came from selling a boat and something else. He was a keen angler. I think he was a champion pike fisherman.
Yeah,
so he had reason to have a boat.
Yeah, he did. There's loads of pictures. Like, he seems to actually be a genuine champion angler.
Yeah.
A big guy, so, it's not the most active of sports, but he does seem to be a talented angler in reality.
Yeah, and I mentioned that, there is a line in it saying, in his early years, he wasn't involved in crime, and he was a champion pike fisherman.
Yeah,
so it's given in evidence. He's getting the full,
there you go. He's getting
the full CV, but it also goes on then. They talk about the social welfare payments he got. So, there's usually a full affidavit from a social welfare officer who is granted anonymity. This is part of, there's civilians who make up the Criminal Assets Bureau, and you'd have revenue officers as well, and they go through, whatever kind of tax returns people would have done. And again, it's to build up a financial picture, again, to show that, there's very little chance that this person could have had 33 grand hidden in socks, for legitimate reasons. So they kind of went through. So, I mean, since 2015, he's been on disability, and it's kind of averaging, say, 13, 14 grand a year, or a bit less. And so that total of that was 130,723. And he was getting job seekers between 2007 and 2015, again, at the time when the gang are in the middle of a lethal gangland feud. So he got 74 grand in that. And before that, he got 70,000. So you're talking, it was kind of over the course of 3 decades, the 90s, the 2000s, and into the teens, he was getting this money. I mean, and it was up to date. It was right up to last October. So presumably there was no mention of it in court, that he'd been cut off, which they often are.
Yeah.
So there was no mention of that. But usually on the basis that if you've got 33 grand, you're these are all means tested payments. So you've lied about your means if you have 33 grand in cash lying around in the house, and you're disqualified then from your social welfare.
And of course, they said in your piece, it says he spent the past 20 years heavily involved in drug dealing activities. So did they draw up a picture of the roles of the different brothers in this criminal gang?
Well, one of the things that they made a point of was that they are actually a separate standalone organised crime group, separate from the Keanes, although they were aligned at one point, and we used to regularly write about the Keane Colopy. So this kind of division, this more obvious kind of separation that we've kind of noticed in the last couple of years, is actually, it's always been like that. It wasn't alignment. Now there is. I'm not gone off topic slightly here, but it did mention one of the brothers, had a child with one of Christy Keane's daughters. So that would, Christy Keane, the head of the Keane organised crime gang, would be a grandfather to one of the Colopy's children. So, there is kind of a family ties there as well. But there was Philip, who was killed in 2009. He was kind of seen as very much one of the enforcers, and he was very much a weapons enthusiast, to say the least. I think somebody described him as a gun nut.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he was demonstrating how to use a Glock 9mm to some people, and accidentally shot himself in the head. He forgot that there was still a bullet in the chamber, having taken out the magazine.
Yeah.
But
I mean, Philip was probably the most feared of the brothers, and certainly the Dundons he was the prime target. In particular, for John Dundon had made a number of attempts on Philip Colopy's life, and some of those attempts, backfired, and there was other innocent people caught up in that. But even after, after the murder of Shane Gagan, actually, when John Dundon, it's in the evidence in court where he rang up Philip Colopy to taunt him, even though thinking that they managed to kill Johnny McNamara, an associate of the Colopys, but they got the wrong guy. So that bad blood between Dose and Philip. But of course, Philip tragically lost his life. Now, Brian, we've always described as kind of the head of the family. He survived a number of hit attempts himself, and he's previously been a target of CAB. He's also, even in recent years, received serious convictions for dealing offences.
Yeah, he's out at the moment, but yeah, he got an 8-year sentence. They were caught pretty much red-handed, sorting out heroin drug deals in a house in the Island Field.
Yeah.
And like, he's done his time for that. Of course, his son, Kenneth, is serving life for a murder as well. Shot a man in the head. It was seemed like a very strange sort of kind of impulsive attack on another young man. So, I mean, I suppose their volatile, dangerous reputation is deserved in that sense. But I mean, they went through, over the years, in recent times, just in the last year or two, you'd have people getting serious sentences that are associates of the Colopys, for people caught with, several hundred thousands of cocaine. Also, there's people facing, I think there's trials coming up, or, we're facing charges in relation to, I suppose, the gang as well, or associates of theirs. But, and even over the years, like Brian Colopy's home was Brian Colopy home, he was raided, I think it was 40 grand's worth of cannabis found at one time in 2007. There was something like nearly $250,000 of heroin and 300,000 of cocaine in 2009. There was another time in one of the St. Edith Street, there was another 230,000 worth of heroin and cocaine. There's associates again, like I mentioned, with huge amounts. They also what I think one of the kind of earlier kind of issues that got them, I suppose, on the spotlight was this brawl in a car park outside Supermax in 2003. Yeah. And there was a number of the Colopys, including Ray Collopy, got jail time over that. And I think wasn't it the Garda Sub-Aqua squad happened to be parked up and were getting burgers and chips themselves, and they ended up having to wade in to break it up.
I mean, I think some of the McCarthy's, you could see that bad blood existed because they were the people that were involved on the other side. And if you look back, as far as I remember, Eds McCarthy, who would go on to become a very notorious figure himself, he was caught up in that row as well. So it was, if you look even back as 22 years, you'll see some of those names still featuring heavily.
Yeah.
Obviously, we heard during the case as well that this money, this 33,000, that it was linked to a trip to Bulgaria where Ray's brother Vincent had at the time was effectively on the run.
Yeah, well, this is a bit. This was after that. This would have been in 2019, and it was a visit to Spain. And basically the Garda intelligence. This is what they said in the affidavit. The Garda intelligence was that they were meeting another Limerick drug dealer based out there, who is definitely not a household name, and it was to set up an ecstasy deal. But in 2012 when. Of course, all this time, Ray Collopy was still collecting these disability payments as well at the time. But in 2012, he went to Bulgaria with Vincent, who was on the run. The guards wanted to talk to him at the time in relation to the whole series of threats to Willie Moore, and it would have been a former associates of the Colopy brothers. And while so I mean, he was out there, and I think Vincent kind of. Set up a couple of routes out there as well. He ended up marrying a Bulgarian woman. I think they have 4 children together, which was mentioned by the guards in this. So they also managed to get in trouble with the police over there as well. I think Vincent picked up some convictions there for, in relation to drugs that were found. But I mean, look, they were back and forth a lot. We know that they were back and forth between Bulgaria and Spain. That's something that we've written about before. I think there was one of the brothers attempted to buy a pub at one stage they were looking at ways, I suppose, to use their money. There doesn't seem to be a huge amount of property up for grabs,
No.
in terms of what CAB are coming looking for. I mean, they're getting the cash when they can. And in this case, it was 33. But I mean, there has been other cases where it's been 50,000 and much larger amounts of money, which some people are facing charges, as well.
I mean, Kieran was also, the other brother, Kieran was also a target for CAB, and the house that he had, he was also served lengthy sentences for drug dealing offences.
Yeah, and Brian, of course, as well, and handed over. I think there was a house in Fedamore that they agreed to hand over at one point, and I think this would have been a revenue settlement the way it was, I think, done at that particular time. They didn't necessarily bring a proceeds of crime case against them. It was very much kind of a tax bill handed over, and it would be agreed then to hand over certain assets or whatever.
Because I mean, he's a funny sort of character, Brian Colopy, because there was a couple of occasions when he was pictured doing the ice cream cones in the van. I don't know if you remember that. And he also used to sell Christmas trees. So he had a kind of an everyman sort of attitude, but they were regarded as, the Colopys are still regarded as not even just a local Limerick gang, but a kind of a drug dealing gang of national significance.
Yeah, I mean, they were like, it was mentioned that, when Christy Keane went into prison that time in the early 2000s, he was caught with a bag of cannabis and like a sack or whatever it was. It was a decent few kilos. And Brian basically took over the business, or he took over that market share, and which is very much the Midwest. It was Limerick and a good bit of Munster as well.
Yeah.
So it was it was a good chunk of the drugs trade at a time when, it was really gearing up. Which is why it led to all this violence. That plus it's such a tight area, and people knew each other so well in a sense that the level of bitterness could escalate pretty high pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I mean the Colopys obviously became sort of the number one supplier, certainly at one stage into places like Limerick and also up as far as Sligo. They definitely had links to criminal figures. I think during one. A previous CAB case, we heard how an associate of George, the Penguin Mitchell, was spotted meeting them down somewhere midway between Dublin and Limerick, if I remember correctly. So they had all of these ties, and they certainly had other ties to criminal figures, including members of the Ratigan gang.
And you would have had in this case as well. There was talk of meetings with Philip Dunn in Meath, who would be a brother of Sean Dunn. Yeah. And again, Philip Dunn was also mentioned, if you remember, in connection with the gangs in Sligo.
Yeah.
So, you've people that are dealing, people who are dealing drugs in all parts of the country, connected to each other.
Yeah.
And it's something, it's in one sense, it's not new, but it's interesting to get the actual names of who is meeting who, and when they were doing it. And it gives you a real figure, it gives you a real kind of sense of how this is a business.
Yeah.
This is different suppliers and distributors having meetings, organizing, getting the product to market and making money. Yeah,
and there's a kind of a high level. There's these guys, probably all roughly the similar age, in their late 40s, who all know each other. And a gang like the Colopys, we always think, they used to say they're associated with this person or that person, but really they'll deal with anybody when the moment arises. And, they have all these other different sources. So, a lot of them are out of prison now again, and certainly Brian and spent a lot of time. They seem to be, but they're still a force according to the guards in the local area in Limerick.
Without a doubt. And funnily enough, Raymond Colopy was charged over, possession of the proceeds of crime over this 33 grand, and a jury acquitted him last December.
Yeah.
So, so even though, he was acquitted on that charge, he didn't get his money back. CAB went after it. He actually didn't contest it. He didn't make an appearance at all. Even in the formal sense, there wasn't even an appearance made in affidavit by a solicitor on his behalf or anything like that, let alone a physical appearance in court. So it was just walk away from the 33 grand rather than, waste his time, I suppose. He keeps better time spent fishing, I guess, than sitting around in the High Court.
Certainly a nicer way to spend your afternoon, all right. Okay, well, thanks very much, Eamon.
It was a pleasure, Niall.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of
A
it.
Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.